Jacques Futrelle, the mystery of the ghost woman. Ruby Regan, a veteran cracksman, was conducting a routine operation with his usual blend of vigor and silence. He eased the study door shut behind him. His rubber soles met the thick carpet without a sound in the absolute blackness. For a long moment, he stood frozen, listening. A vague professional instinct told him someone else was in the room. Then, he clicked on his electric torch. Directly ahead sat a wide library table cluttered with books. To his left, the bulky silhouette of a roll-top desk emerged from the shadows. Beyond lay chairs, a cabinet, and rows of bookshelves. This brief but thorough inspection seemed to satisfy Regan. He extinguished the light, retreated to the door, and slowly, avoiding any audible click, slid the bolt into place. He then unlatched one of the windows, ensuring an escape route was ready should anyone enter. There was no other door. Now it was time to work. The desk was his first objective. Regan switched on his torch, propped it steadily on the edge of the desk, and aimed the beam at the lock. After a slow, meticulous examination, he dropped to his knees and began to manipulate his picks. In the sharp glare, his shock of red hair glowed crimson. He placed his revolver to his right, within easy reach. Nearly half an hour later, the lock yielded. With a sigh of relief, Regan cautiously lifted the lid. Inside, he found a beehive of pigeonholes stuffed with papers and a small metal strongbox. He pulled the papers out one by one, scanned them briefly, and tossed them aside with ruthless indifference. Next, he ransacked the drawers, scrutinizing every item before returning it. It must be in the box, he finally decided. Sitting on the floor, he clamped the strongbox between his knees and applied his manifold talents to the task. A few minutes more, a sharp metallic snap, and the lid sprang open. Regan grinned. The box was packed tight with bundles of banknotes. Yet, he dumped them unceremoniously onto the floor. He was hunting for something else. How very strange, he thought at last. It's nowhere to be found. He paused, glancing fondly at the scattered currency. Well, if I can't find what I came for, I'll take what's here, he resolved. He began stuffing the money into his pockets. Every so often, Regan smoothed down his red hair, a sure sign he was deeply puzzled. Just as he was about to rise and continue his search elsewhere, a voice spoke, calm, peaceful, and pleasant, barely 2 feet behind his right ear. I wouldn't reach for that revolver. If I were you, the voice advised, or I shall have to fire. Regan's hand moved instinctively toward the weapon on the desk, but at the sharp, distinctive click of a hammer being cocked, he recoiled. Realizing he was at a dead end, he sank back to the floor, bracing for a shot. When none came, he turned his head to see why. The sight stunned him. In the center of the room wavered a translucent, white, gossamer thing, the likeness of a woman's figure. But was it a woman? A white mist enveloped the head. No features were visible through the hazy veil. In the dim, reflected light, the apparition looked absurdly immaterial. Yet, the voice was feminine, the voice of a young girl. To be precise, please do not move and do not make a noise, the voice cautioned again. Yes, definitely a young woman. Regan noticed a small, gold-mounted revolver in her right hand. The muzzle was leveled directly at his head from a very short distance. He also noted that the weapon hung in the air with chilling steadiness, neither trembling nor wavering. Very well, madam. Ruby grunted reluctantly. The white figure moved around him, or perhaps she floated. She retrieved his revolver from the desk and asked, "You are Mr. Regan, are you not?" "I am, madam," Regan replied, too bewildered to lie. "Did you find it?" "No, madam." Was the phantom real? Doubting his senses, Regan rubbed his eyes. Surely he had fallen asleep. Any moment now he would wake up. He squeezed his eyes shut and opened them again. But the girl had not vanished. She was there, though she couldn't possibly be. She couldn't be real, for she was a specter. She certainly hadn't been in the room when he entered, and she couldn't have entered later, for he had bolted the door from inside. "I am sorry to trouble you, Mr. Regan," the phantom continued, "but it's time to empty your pockets and return that money to its place." Regan's eyes flicked to the muzzle of the revolver. The ghost woman gave it a subtle, menacing tilt. That piece of cold steel, at least, was undeniably real. Without a word, He began to pull out the bundles of banknotes. Only then did he risk looking up again. "You have produced only 8 bundles," the spectral girl noted calmly. "You took 9. "Yes, madam," Regan agreed. He felt as if he were under a hypnotic spell. Fumbling through his pockets, he retrieved the final stack, placed it in the box, snapped the metal lid shut, and engaged the lock. "Excellent," she said with a note of approval. "Now, you may go about your business." To rise, Regan had to shift onto all fours, a movement that was inherently clumsy. The apparition drifted slightly to one side, though she remained uncomfortably close. Suddenly, Regan lunged. He thrust both arms forward, striking upward at her wrist to knock the weapons from her grasp. He snatched his torch from the desk and killed the light. In the sudden vacuum of darkness, the room erupted into a chaos of scuffling feet. A sharp, desperate cry rang out, followed by the roar of a gunshot. Stumbling blindly, Regan thrashed through the room in search of the door. He found the bolt and yanked it back with savage force. But a heavy thumping echoed from the hallway. Someone was sprinting toward the study. Regan froze. The window. It was his only hope. The shot had roused the entire household. He lunged for the glass, but the frame refused to budge. The noise was now directly outside the door. Desperate, Regan clawed for the window latches, but they seemed to have vanished into thin air. The door groaned under a barrage of heavy blows. The wood began to splinter. The bolt was giving way. With a roar of desperation, Regan drove his fist through the glass, scrambled onto a chair, and tumbled out into the night. A moment later, the door shivered and collapsed inward. The morning after. The following morning, Chester Mills, a wealthy merchant, appeared in the office of Detective Mallory, chief of the Criminal Investigation Bureau. "I own a large estate 40 miles from the city," Mills began without preamble. "Yesterday was the end of the month, so I withdrew $900 from the bank. At home, I locked it in a metal strongbox and hid that box inside my roll-top desk. I went to bed at 11. At approximately 2 in the morning, I was jolted awake by a pistol shot in the study. I raced toward the hallway and met one of my servants, O'Brien. The study door was locked from the inside, so we had to break it down. As we did, we heard the sound of crashing glass. When the door finally gave way, O'Brien switched on the lights. One of the windows was shattered, as if someone had leaped or been thrown through it. My desk had been ransacked. Papers were strewn everywhere, and the lid was up. I retrieved the strong box. It had been pierced. A bullet had entered through the top and exited the side. I found a .32 caliber slug embedded in a shelf. Here it is. Mills tossed a flattened piece of lead onto the desk. Mallory examined it closely. And then, Mills continued, I encountered the first riddle. I opened the box to count the money. Not only was every bundle accounted for, but there was more money than I had deposited. I can swear to the $900, as can the bank teller, but there was an extra $10 bill inside. Detective Mallory remained silent, chewing his cigar with grim focus. O'Brien found a soft black hat near the door, Mills added, along with a fully loaded .38 caliber revolver, a coat, a broken electric torch, and a complete set of burglar's tools. I roused the female staff, ordered a search of the house, and went back to bed. As far as I can tell, nothing was stolen. Well, in that case, the detective began, you haven't heard the half of it. Mills interrupted sharply. As I said, the window was broken, so I left O'Brien in the study to stand guard. At 3:30, I was awakened again, this time by a scream. A woman's scream. I rushed back to the study. The lights were still on, but O'Brien was gone. I assumed the scream had drawn him away, but, well, O'Brien has vanished. Not a trace of him since. Enter the thinking machine. It was at this point that the investigation reached Professor Augustus S. Van Dusen, the eminent logician known to the world as the thinking machine. The facts were presented to him by Hutchinson Hatch, the reporter. The venerable scientist narrowed his eyes until they were mere slits of cold blue, his high, domed forehead furrowed with deep lines of concentration. Why was it necessary to fire a shot? Hatch asked, clearly baffled. And who pulled the trigger? Were there two burglars who fought? There were bloodstains on the ground outside, but the man who jumped might have simply been cut by glass. And why shoot the strong box? You can't break a lock that way. It's easier just carry the box off. What does the extra $10 mean? Where's O'Brien? Who was the woman screaming? And finally, why was nothing stolen? Having unleashed this waterfall of questions, Hatch flopped into an armchair and lit a cigarette, waiting for the thinking machine to provide an explanation. The professor cast a brief, disapproving glance at the young man and remarked cuttingly, "You have yet to ask the most vital question, namely, what specific object was in that study, or supposed to be there? An object so significant that 2 daring, even reckless, attempts were made to secure it in a single night. It seems to me impossible to know that until—" "Nothing is impossible. Hatch, this is a simple sum in arithmetic. 2 and 2 make 4, not occasionally, but always. However, the problem is currently too vague, especially regarding the disappearance of O'Brien. First of all, are we certain nothing was stolen from Mills?" "Beyond a doubt," Hatch replied. He checked every paper and found nothing missing from his possessions. The lines on the annoyed scientist's brow deepened, and he lapsed into a long silence. "Was there much blood found outside?" he asked suddenly. "A good deal," said Hatch. "It looks as though someone was badly cut, whether they were thrown from the window or jumped. Blood was found on the shards of glass as well." Van Dusen nodded and continued his cross-examination. "Is it established that the woman heard screaming was not one of the servants?" "Oh, yes," Hatch answered confidently. "They all retired to their rooms after the first alarm, and the second didn't wake a soul. They only learned of O'Brien's disappearance this morning." "Has the police found anything?" "Nothing yet. The items left in the room are useful. Of course, the hat, the coat, and the burglary tools. They're working with those. Perhaps they'll identify the culprit through them." "Well, then, it seems we must find the man who leaped from that window ourselves," the scientist said serenely. "Once we do, the entire story will unravel." "Of course, when we do," Hatch smirked. "Naturally we can do it. We must seek a man without a hat or overcoat, with glass cuts, and perhaps severely injured." "But he's the sort of man who would bolt for his burrow like a frightened rabbit," Hatch added. "No matter how badly hurt, anyone who could walk away can hide. Do you imagine, Mr. Hatch, that a leap through a shower of glass and a 20-foot drop onto a hard pavement is a trivial affair?" the scientist inquired acidly. "If that man escaped without grave injury, it is a miracle. Therefore—" He fell silent abruptly, glanced sideways at the pressman, and unexpectedly changed the subject. "I wish to model a situation for you, and ask one question. But first, I shall write down the answer." He took a slip of paper from the table. "You are an intelligent man. I shall prove that the minds of intelligent men run in the same channels." The professor scribbled a few words, folded the paper, and handed it to the reporter. "Now, imagine you're a burglar," he began. "Perhaps one well known to the police. You have jumped from a window and are badly hurt. You need medical attention but cannot afford it, as you risk capture. You have no hat or coat. You go to a doctor far from the scene and invent a story to explain your condition. What would you say to avoid suspicion and ensure your safety, at least for the time being?" Hatch smiled skeptically, twisting the paper in his fingers. He lit another cigarette and considered the problem with total gravity. "I think," Hatch said finally, picking his words with uncharacteristic hesitation, "the safest bet would be to tell the doctor I was thrown from a motor car. I'd say I lost my hat, got cut by the windshield, the car sped off, and I was battered by the fall. Something along those lines." The professor gave him a piercing look, rose, and left the room. Hatch took a deep breath and reluctantly unfolded the paper. On it was written, "Speeding motor car, cut by glass, hat lost, bruises and abrasions from fall." The scientist returned shortly, dressed for the street. "Hatch, go to Mills at once. Ask if he has discovered any missing item in the study. Most likely a document," he commanded. Then, without explaining why, look into his personal affairs. See if there are any lawsuits involving him. I suspect one is either ongoing or about to begin. See me this evening." "Are you coming with me?" the reporter asked. No, the scientist replied impatiently. "I am going to visit the man who jumped out the window." The awakening. When Ruby Regan, the expert cracksman, regained consciousness, he found himself staring into two squinting blue eyes, unnaturally magnified by thick spectacles. The eyes sat in a thin, narrow face topped by a shock of straw-colored hair. "Do not be alarmed," the stranger said. "You are in no danger. In a day or two, you will be quite yourself again." "Who are you?" Regan asked distrustfully. "I am acting on behalf of the gentleman who employed you to secure that document from Mr. Mills's study," the scientist replied cheerfully. "You are in my home. A doctor has treated you, and I moved you here as soon as I found you. He suspects nothing. He is convinced you were injured in a motor accident, just as you claimed." The cracksman closed his eyes and drifted into thought. Through the haze of blood loss, he pieced together the fragments of the night. The desperate leap, the frantic run through deserted streets, the collapse of the doctor's door, and the mumbled lie about a motor accident. He opened his eyes and looked again at the impenetrable face of the thinking machine. It all seemed to hold together. "The cops, they don't know?" Regan asked suddenly. "No," the professor replied with emphasis. "Who fired that shot?" "The ghost woman." The burglar answered instantly. "But I reckon it was an accident. She was just as scared making a noise as I was." "And you jumped when you heard the commotion at the door?" "I wasn't sticking around to find out." Regan grunted. "The laws never laid a hand on me, and I don't plan on making their acquaintance now." "And neither did the ghost," the scientist concluded. "Tell me about her." Regan recounted every detail of the encounter in the study. "So that's how it went," he finished. "I never even got to the papers." "So this lady was in white?" "Head to toe. Ghost or not, she's the one who started the row." Ruby paused for a moment. "But if you ask me, she was a spook. There was no way into that room. She must have slid through the keyhole." "And she called you by name?" "Yeah, that's another reason I think she was a phantom. How'd she know my name? And why'd she ask if I'd found it?" The missing link. Hutchinson had arrived an hour later, looking breathless and triumphant. He found the thinking machine in his laboratory, draped in a large chair. The professor looked entirely idle, not a wrinkle on his brow, his fingers lazily interlaced. "What are the lawsuits, Hatch?" he asked without turning. "I found a dozen cases involving Mills," Hatch reported, "but one stands out." "A matter of property rights, I presume?" the scientist interrupted. "Exactly. A massive estate and significant real estate. Mills's old partner, Martin Pendexter, died a few years back. Now his grandson, a young man of 22, is suing Mills for a share of the fortune, claiming Mills pocketed it after the grandfather passed. Mills refused to even discuss it, so the kid took him to court. The hearing is coming up soon. And Mills is standing firm? He seems certain. He probably has a deed or a release from the elder Pendexter and plans to produce it in court. He's warned the kid to drop the suit, but won't say why." "Aha!" the scientist murmured. After a long silence, he added softly, "Of course, naturally, then the ghost is one of—" Hatch cut him off impatiently. "There's more. Detective Downey told me the police identified one of the men in the study by his tools. A man named Ruby Regan." "Ruby Regan," the scientist repeated musingly. "Ah, yes. He is sleeping in the next room." The revelation. Shortly after, Mills, Detective Mallory, and Hutchinson Hatch gathered to hear the thinking machine's final verdict. "There is nothing mysterious here," the scientist declared. "In short, the man bringing the suit against you, Mr. Mills, hire a cracksman to break into your study and locate the document that proves your legal right to the Pendexter property. The burglar entered and searched. In vain, I believe. During his search, he found the money in the box. The temptation was too great. Perhaps against his orders, he pocketed the cash. Later, he was forced at gunpoint to return it. In his haste and terror, he accidentally included a $10 bill of his own. But who forced him to return it? It was... He paused, scribbled a name on a slip of paper, and handed it to Mills. Impossible. Mills cried out. "Let us avoid names, if you please," the scientist cautioned. "The essential fact is that it was a woman, and I must say, a woman of remarkable, even heroic, courage. She managed to disarm the cracksman, taking his revolver in addition to her own, and forced the intruder to retreat. When he attempted to regain his weapon, a brief struggle ensued. It was at that moment she fired, likely by accident, and the bullet pierced the strong box. The burglar then leaped from the window and fled. But how did she enter the room, and where did she go? She had entered the study before the burglar arrived and was hiding, presumably behind the heavy portieres at the entrance. She came there seeking that same document. When the thief leaped out and you, along with O'Brien, burst into the room, she managed to slip out through the very door you had forced open. Furthermore, we can surmise that she joined the female servants in their screaming. Pure logic tells us what followed. The commotion died down. The house grew still, and the woman, unaware that O'Brien had been left on guard, returned to the study to continue her search for the document. Your servant sat in the darkness. Hearing her footsteps, he switched on the light. Caught off guard, she screamed, but then O'Brien recognized her. She managed by some means, perhaps a bribe, to persuade him to disappear. Thus, she avoided exposure. Had a search been conducted, I dare say she would have been found safely asleep in her own bed. Since we initially knew nothing of the incidents leading to the shot in the flight, the first thing to strike the logical mind was the presence of that extra $10 bill. From this, we deduced the box was open and the burglar acted, or was forced to act, as an honest man. The mismatch between the recovered bullet and the .38 caliber revolver left behind suggests a second weapon, the one that actually struck the box. Burglars are not inherently honest. Does this not imply he was coerced? We must then assume that an honest person was in that room, alone with a criminal. 1,000 possibilities arise. Setting those aside for a moment, it became necessary to find a dishonest participant. This was a simple, if tedious, matter of telephoning doctors to find one who had treated a man injured in a supposed motor accident. That is how I found your Ruby Regan, Mr. Mallory, and from him I learned the truth. He saw a woman, ghostly, dressed in white, which clearly indicated a resident of the house. White lace peignoirs are hardly standard attire for a 2:00 stroll in the streets. Do you feel these explanations are necessary, Mr. Van Dusen? Mills interrupted. He was deathly pale. I understand it all now, and I assure you, to continue is to intrude upon private matters important only to me and my family. The professor waved a hand as if dismissing the objection. For your own sake, Mr. Mills, I will say that the motives driving this young lady suggest not only great courage, but deep loyalty to you, and perhaps a certain affection for another. Do you take my meaning? She somehow learned, perhaps from that other person, that Regan had been hired for the task. Only a man certain of her love would entrust her with such a scheme. Her loyalty to you, and a natural desire to save that man's reputation in your eyes, drove her to seek the document herself. That she and the cracksman arrived at the same time was a mere coincidence. The scientist fell silent. He had said all he deemed necessary. Continue. Detective Mallory demanded, I want the whole story. Why not find Regan yourself, Mallory? The professor suggested after a long pause. I succeeded. Surely you can too. Where is he? Where did you see him? At my home, Van Dusen replied calmly. I left him there when I came here. But a man who makes such confessions does not linger where he made them, provided he is able to walk. The case stands exactly as I have laid out, Mr. Mills. I believe your refusal to explain your property rights to that young man is entirely justified. Therefore, I shall ask no further questions. I will tell you, Mills suddenly burst out. The truth is, he is not actually Pendexter's grandson. If the case goes to court, I would be forced to reveal that, which is why I advise him against a lawsuit. "I suspected as much," the professor remarked. Ruby Regan left the Thinking Machine's house in a hired carriage late that same evening, and a few days later, the Pendexter suit was withdrawn by the plaintiff.